This is the blueprint to get flexible one time and keep it forever. And I'm going to walk you through what's holding you back, optimal training programs, and how often you should train your mobility to achieve it. Starting with step 1, your flexibility ladder. A flexibility ladder is all the things that are restricting your flexibility and at what level they're limiting you. They can be different muscles, nerve tensions, technique issues, strength deficits, and more. I created the flexibility ladder to show you how in order to achieve your goal flexibility, you need to move everything to at least that level. Anything below your goal level is limiting you, which is why it's so important to identify what is below your goal level, as these are the only areas of your body that you need to improve. The problem is, most people don't solve for the limiting factors. Instead, they just do stretches for the most commonly focused areas, like the hamstrings or lats, or just stretch where they feel it. But that is probably not your personal limitation. The breakthrough progress you're after is found by working on the lowest things on your personal flexibility ladder. So you need to find what's lowest, fix those areas until they're at or above the level you need to achieve your goal flexibility. And you might be wondering, how do I have any authority to speak on the subject? Well, let me tell you something insane. After 6 years of normal stretching, my flexibility looked like this. I was super tight, genetically not flexible, and holding basic stretches did not work for me. I was nowhere near the splits, and there was a very long way for me to get my head to touch my toe. It wasn't until I figured out my own flexibility ladder that I was able to transform my flexibility as an adult. Then I applied the flexibility ladder to help other people from all different levels and age groups do the same, from students in their teens and early 20s, all the way up to achieving their splits in their 50s and up to 65 years old. These results were achieved through the Mobility and Flexibility Toolkit and my private coaching for elite athletes, which took Cam McAvoy from 29th in the Tokyo 2021 Olympics before working with me to becoming the fastest swimmer in the world, winning Olympic gold in Paris 2024. I say this not to show off, but to prove to you that it is possible to transform your mobility as an adult. To do this, we need to identify what is lowest on your flexibility ladder with an assessment. Right now, you're on one of two paths. Path 1 is stretching like an amateur. Your stretches are chosen based on what flows well or where you feel it the most, hoping that it hits the right area. You didn't measure progress at the start or test to see what is the problem, leaving you blind to whether your training is working, and if you're lucky that some things are making that little bit of improvement, you definitely don't know why, so you can't maximize the result. Now, path number 2 is stretching like a pro. You measure your starting level, test which muscles are tight, and find out whether you need to focus on increasing your range of motion or building your strength to go with your range. This is then used to build a program where you intentionally choose in which order to train your body, so you deliberately select the 3 to 5 stretches that will target what you need the most, and you optimize the training schedule with 1 or 2 flexibility sessions per week that work alongside your other sports, strength training, and daily life. It's like chopping down a tree with a blunt axe. Path 1 is how I used to think it worked. You pick up the axe and start chopping. 4 hours later, the tree falls down. Now in path 2, you spend the first 30 minutes sharpening the axe, and then you start chopping. 1 hour later, the tree falls. On both paths, you have the same axe and the same tree. But on path 2, it takes half the time. Assessing your flexibility before training is the same as sharpening that axe before cutting the tree. Let's say you want to build your flexibility ladder for your shoulders with muscle length tests. To do this, we're going to use these bands to look at the muscles that get stretched, mostly when you lift your arms overhead. In this case, we've got the pec major, the red band, subscapularis and teres major is the green band, and lats, the blue band. If we want to isolate out the pec major, we can bring the arm back behind us. You'll notice that only the red band is now being stretched. If we want to isolate and test the subscapularis and teres major, we can externally rotate the shoulder. Now this is just going to place the stretch on subscapularis and teres major to isolate these out. For the lats, it's a little bit more confusing because any movement of the arm is going to change all of these. So we can use the fact that they're the only ones to cross the lower back by rounding our lower back position more to relatively stretch the lats and isolate those out. In this case, if we analyze Darsh's overhead mobility, he needs to focus on his lats. Let's look at another example. If your goal is to touch your toes, most people think it's just about stretching the hamstrings, but there's more to it than that. We also stretch muscles like your adductor magnus and gastrocnemius. Your hip and spine flexors have to contract and be strong to pull you into position. The sciatic nerve gets tensioned, and more. So we should test our flexibility to fold forwards, but also test to see if we have the strength in our hip flexors to be strong enough to lift our leg alongside our flexibility. We can test our sciatic nerve, and more. Together they will give us a much clearer picture to our flexibility ladder, and therefore what is holding us back. Even in the splits, take a look at Sondre versus Sunniva's passive and isometric side splits. Sunniva is much more flexible, but Sondre is much stronger in his range. They have different flexibility ladders. Therefore Sunniva should work on more active flexibility and getting stronger, while Sondre should work on more passive flexibility approaches and increasing his total flexibility. If you only take one thing away, it's that there's always a limiting factor, the thing at the bottom of your flexibility ladder that is limiting you most. We assess to find the lowest thing on the flexibility ladder, fix it, then fix the next lowest thing on the ladder, and repeat until you've reached the level you want. But what is the level of flexibility you need? A lot of people come to me saying they want to improve their hip mobility or shoulder mobility, but what does this mean? If we think about it like strength, the goal of hip strength or shoulder strength does not really make sense. These joints can do lots of things. That's why in the world of strength training, instead of hip strength, we aim to improve something like the squat, deadlift, or vertical jump. Instead of shoulder strength, we work on our push or pull strength, which can then be broken down further into movements like the overhead press, flat, or decline, and so forth. Strength goals are based on movement patterns. Flexibility goals should be too. Rather than doing vague hip mobility drills, you need flexibility that actually works in movement, because stretching one muscle in isolation does not guarantee you can use that flexibility whilst moving. As other muscles, nerves, and tissues become involved, greater coordination is required and the demands on your body increase. This is why we break flexibility down into a series of skills. Working towards these flexibility skills is where the real transformations happen. Because flexibility does not just make you less tight, flexibility makes things easy. Front splits and bridging equaled easier access to learning arching acrobatics and gave me more options in darts. Improving my pancake allows me to compress enough to shoulder press. Being able to side split means I can now bridge wider in climbing, and I have a lower center of mass in my one-arm handstands. Shoulders opened up straight line handstands, bridging, and more. And maybe somewhat counterintuitively, it even made strength moves like the one-arm chin-up easier to access. All of these changes happened as an adult. I did not start young. Many of the movements I can do now would be impossible if I did not take the time to improve my mobility and flexibility when I started. Becoming flexible pays itself into the future. The sooner you achieve the range, the quicker you'll improve in a wide variety of sports, because flexibility gives you a performing edge. So which flexibility skill should you start with? It depends on your goal. For many, it's about restoring your ability to touch your toes again, or reach overhead with ease. Each sport or daily life activity has an optimal way of moving to maximize your effectiveness. The better you can execute these movements, the better your technique, the better you perform. It's your mobility that allows you to get into the proper positions to execute on that technique. You can be the strongest with the most work capacity, but if you can't get into the position for the optimal technique, then your strength gets bottlenecked by your lack of mobility. Having the mobility required is what allows you to use all of your strength potential as it goes through that optimal technique, and you don't just have to brute force your way through it with something less efficient. Don't just take my word for it. I've been coaching Andre Strong towards his pancake and splits. He's one of the strongest and most famous calisthenics athletes in the world. I mean, strong is literally in his name. Here's his perspective on why flexibility matters.
I realized that flexibility, it's matter a lot, especially for the athlete and also just for the normal person. To be able to perform skill on the high level, you need to work on your flexibility. Not only the split, not only the pancake, but also the shoulders. If you have a great shoulder flexibility, it will be way easier to perform. So I understand that flexibility, it should be part of the journey for every athlete.
Almost every sport has at least one flexibility skill that correlates to the sport's-specific movements and technique. Even outside of sport, daily life has its own requirements, as lacking mobility can make it harder to pick things up and lift them overhead, harder to hang off a bar, and harder to sit on the floor and play with the kids. Almost all mobility goals will fit into one of these skills, including pike, which is touching your toes, pancake, side split, front split, bridge, shoulder flexion, shoulder extension, and being able to comfortably squat. For Andriy, he needed to improve his pancake and side splits. Now, before you think to yourself, I'm not sure if any of these patterns applies to my body, first you should understand that these skills encompass many joint ranges of motion. In strength, what's more important, your leg extension or your back squat? The back squat. Your biceps curl or your pull-up? It's the pull-up. Why? Because they have more transfer over to real life because they involve your body working together as one. These flexibility skills do the same, and that's why they improve performance. That's why you should focus on them rather than a generic routine. Even if you're just wanting to move a little bit better, you have to solve all the individual joint limitations in order to create the progress required for the larger skill. So even if your goal is not to achieve a full split, improving towards it will likely give you the benefits you're looking for. Let's look at some examples. Olympic swimmer Cam McAvoy hired me to help him improve his 50-meter freestyle. To swim as fast as possible, you need to be streamlined as you dive into the water, fluid with your underwater kicks, and be able to pull with power on each stroke of the freestyle technique. This requires your shoulders, hips, and spine to be flexible but also strong in their range of motion. Open shoulders, spine, and hip extension are the pieces to a bridge. Yet how many swimmers do you see training for the bridge? Almost none. My job with Cam is to organize all of his training outside of the swimming. I program his mobility, strength, periodization, and so forth. We use the bridge as our metric of mobility success. As the bridge improves, his performance should improve with it. So we worked on shoulder, spine, and hip mobility and integrated them into the bridge. We made his ranges strong and peaked it into his swimming performance. Cam transformed his flexibility as part of his journey to becoming the fastest swimmer in the world. From 29th in the 2021 Olympics, Cam is now the 2023 World Champion, 2024 Olympic Champion, and 2025 World Champion. The principles that make someone win Olympic gold are surprisingly similar to those that help someone starting to move more freely again for the first time, even after decades of neglect. I focus on elite performance because only the top approaches will work, leaving no room for ideas that only kind of work. It takes the most fierce competition to find the truly excellent methods that actually get the best result. And trust me, those methods work just as well for everyone else. Our student here is an example of bringing his shoulder ability back to being able to hang again for the first time in over a decade. His flexibility skill focus was being able to lift his arms overhead and touch his toes. Now we know the flexibility ladder. We have the goal flexibility skill, and we've done an assessment to find what's holding you back from achieving that goal. Now we can go to the next stage and turn this into a training program. And here's the trick. The order of exercises in stretching is typically the opposite to strength training. So traditionally in strength training, we start with a big compound movement when we're fresh at the start, like a chin-up, and then follow it up with more accessory movements like a biceps curl. In flexibility training, we do the opposite. We start with the smaller, isolated stretches, like for our hamstrings and hip flexors. This then opens up our range ready for the bigger compound movement like a front split. We do this because stretching experiences a multiplying effect, which I call stretch stacking. Imagine you do two different stretches, one for your shoulders and one for your hips. Through stretching this way, we make 1 unit of progress for our shoulders and 1 for our hips, a total of 2 units of progress for the session. Now imagine you do 2 stretches, but this time they're both for your shoulders. The first stretch might open up range in the pec major muscle, which then means the second exercise, let's say that's for your lats, can then go further, because the pec no longer limits the lat stretch as much. This creates an effect where 1 + 1 = 3, as each exercise stacks on top of the previous, which takes each session much further than trying to improve everywhere at once, as each exercise is helping open up things for the next. By intelligently selecting 3 to 5 stretches that are all aligned towards the same skill, you can benefit from the stretch stacking effect. That's what we do, and that's how you can also make big jumps in your mobility and flexibility. When you train this way, you'll likely see progress almost every session, as everything is working together. Imagine every time you stretched, you went deeper and unlocked extra range of motion. What would that do for you? For me, it gave me confidence in the direction I was going. The next step is to choose which exercises to use. As they say to the person with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. but not everything in life is a nail. That's why it's important to have different tools in your toolkit. The same applies to stretching. Some people overly focus on just one stretching method and then their progress stops and they wonder why. To give you more chances of success, let's look at the assisted to resisted spectrum. It's a powerful tool to know which exercises you should focus on, and Maria is going to show us an example with the side splits. First, there's heavily assisted. The full force of your body weight and gravity is pushing you deeper into the stretch. If we flip this upside down with small ankle weights, we're now assisted. The weights combined with the leverage of our legs assist us into the stretch, but not as much as our entire body weight before. Remove the ankle weights, and there's significantly less helping you deeper, so it's a more neutral position. We transition as it becomes more about being able to pull yourself into position. To make it resisted, we can perform a standing tilt by lifting the leg against gravity. Add weight to this, and it's now heavily resisted, where we strength train to our existing range of motion. These zones form the main stages of the assisted to resisted spectrum and can be applied across the flexibility skills. As you move from left to right across these spectrums, you go from being pulled by something else into the stretch to using your own strength to pull yourself into the stretch. So flexibility and strength training are not opposites, but two ends of the same spectrum. Pretty much every exercise can be placed on this spectrum, which means we now have many ways of targeting our training. Assisted training allows you to stretch deeper, whilst resisted training makes your range stronger and more usable, whilst middle develops a little bit of both. Improving your flexibility is a game of knowing when to push the ceiling of your total flexibility by training more assisted, versus when you need to focus on getting stronger into your existing range of motion and training more resisted. With stretch stacking, we can then maximize these effects. Let's say the first exercise, A1, is an assisted exercise that will open our range. And the second exercise, A2, is a resisted exercise that strengthens the range. They will both help each other. The first exercise creates more range for the second to then strengthen into, whilst the second exercise is contracting the antagonist, so opposite muscles, which will then cause further relaxation of the muscles we were stretching before, meaning they will be able to go a little bit deeper again in the first exercise. By alternating between the two, we get another 1 + 1 = 3 effect. They go further together than when trained separately. There are many mobility and flexibility training methods that can be used within this spectrum and combined together. The most common stretching method is the static passive stretch, simply holding a stretch for time whilst trying to relax. Sometimes this is the only thing someone needs to improve, but more often than not, there are other things limiting. So here are 10 of my top training methods to improve someone's flexibility, starting with number 1, post-isometric relaxation, or PIR. The most common type of PIR is contract relax, where we contract our muscles for a few seconds, which then allows us to relax a little bit deeper than we normally would for a few seconds. This alternating of contracting and then relaxing is repeated for reps. It might not look like much is happening from the outside, but you'll feel it when you do it. There are many variations, such as antagonist contract relax, where you contract the opposite muscles before relaxing, meaning PIR can be used to solve a variety of problems where we want to be assisted into the stretch. For number 2 is isometric stretching. Here we contract the same muscles that are being stretched, and they need to hold us into position, building strength and control at our end range. Examples include the isometric front splits, but sometimes the skill itself is an isometric, like the bridge. For 3, and arguably better than pure isometrics, is doing isometric holds, but for reps. These are powerful, and it's one of the most common methods I program for people. Think about it like this. Instead of holding a long 30-second isometric, you perform reps with around 3 seconds hold on each rep. This way you get a short rest in between the reps, meaning you can train deeper and with higher intent and quality. Each rep goes further, so the training effect is greater than just purely holding the entire time, where it's just not possible to go as deep. Compare an isometric horse stance to a horse stance squat. Your adductors will get a better stimulus from the reps because of the short rests in between. So number 4, active lifts. Now we're contracting the opposite muscles to those being stretched, the ones that have to shorten to pull us into position. This is resisted training, and this is where full control comes in, as you can access the range when you need it. Compression work will be a classic example of this. and it's one where learning to solve the cramping problem becomes very important. Taking this further, we can do active lifts with an eccentric overload. By lifting a leg with a bent knee, we can lift higher than we normally would. And on the way down, we're stronger so we can straighten the leg and then lower. This is a great way of building strength into that very top portion that we would not be able to normally lift to if we kept the leg straight the entire time. 5 is dynamic stretching. We lift with speed and momentum. Inside your body, there are different muscle spindles that detect the stretch. Some of these detect just the amount of stretch, whilst others detect both the amount and the speed of the stretch. Dynamic stretching is stretching at high speeds. If you want your flexibility to transfer dynamically to kicks or acrobatics, dynamic stretching is a useful tool to bridge that gap. The number 6 is ballistic or rapid contract relax. I was taught ballistic stretching when I lived with the Shaolin monks in China. Using momentum, you can pulse deeper into the stretch than you could without it. These micro stretches then add up over the total set. Since each rep is a very short hold, you can push yourself more than you normally would and accumulate reps of this very deep stretch sensation. Nowadays, I prefer what I call rapid contract relax or RCR. Instead of using momentum, you use your own muscles to pull yourself into the deepest stretch. You then release and relax, which will naturally pull you out of it. This means you're always in control of the depth of the stretch. The 7 is joint capsule releases. Your joints are surrounded by joint capsule that can also cause restrictions. Tight joint capsules are common and people often feel very stiff and where most other stretching methods just aren't working for them. By aligning your body such that you don't really target specific muscle, some of these positions allow us to get deeper than that and stretch the joint capsule itself. For number 8, we have nerve flosses, glides, and tensioners. Nerves have a limited ability to stretch. For the sciatic nerve, it's only about 8 to 10% more than its resting length. So instead, they slide up and down the body in their sheath while we move. If an area gets compressed, the nerve can get stuck and become unable to slide through. This is known as a nerve entrapment, which can cause excruciating pain in some people, an electric type feeling in others, or simply stop you from being able to move any further without you feeling any pain at all, meaning a nerve entrapment can stop your flexibility progress without you even knowing. Nerve exercises such as flosses, glides, and tensioners can help us remove these restrictions. Another powerful tool to help nerve entrapments is number 9, soft tissue treatments. There's a ton of techniques here. I could create a whole in-depth toolkit just on these. Some issues require you to go in and manually help those areas get unblocked. Chronically tight muscles, scar tissue, and more can limit your body's ability to stretch and move properly. Soft tissue work then becomes a cheat code to fix flexibility fast when targeted to the right area. Some techniques require an expert to help, but I've developed a whole database of methods that work to target specific areas on your own. The best part is the assessments could help you locate some of these issues. Here's the big picture. Rather than blindly foam rolling or smashing yourself in a massage ball, think about using these tools, but through the stretch. All these methods we've just talked about can work. It's through a proper assessment that you find out what you need to work on at the bottom of your flexibility ladder, and clever training program design that transforms it. As you can see, there are many ways of solving the flexibility puzzle, and each training method has its own optimal program design with it. As a little disclaimer, this video is about the system that will work for most people most of the time. How to find the 3 to 5 targeted stretches, trained 1 to 2 times per week for 1 or 2 skills at a time. Sometimes we need to approach things differently. It depends on the adaptation or problem you're trying to solve for, but I recommend you understand this blueprint first. It's the foundation for the majority of cases. But even with all the right exercises, some people still can't progress, which brings us to exercise category number 10, and definitely one of the most underrated, technique exercise drills. These are not about stretching, but rather about learning the proper technique. We can use exercises that make it easier to learn the specific skills as practice to get into the correct positions, learn how to activate the right muscles, and cue our bodies to move how we need them to move. Sometimes just a small tweak in the way you perform a stretch can make a big difference in your result. This is something we've seen over and over again with the side split. Trying to side split by just opening your legs to the side does not work for most people. The hip jams, which can stop your progress completely and even cause pain at the hip. Bone on bone does not flex very far. Instead, you need to anteriorly tilt the hips forward. Alternatively, you can externally rotate the legs by pointing your feet up. Both of these technique changes create the same alignment at the hip, creating enough room at your hip to drop into your deepest side split. We've had multiple students who were stuck with a side split, and after making this one change in their technique, they were able to break through a plateau and massively speed up their progress. Sometimes the only piece missing on the flexibility ladder was understanding the correct technique, which happened with Theo.
For me, as I said, it was like a mental barrier, and the advice and the tips and tricks that Matt had were really profound and helped me to overcome my mental barrier. And I reached a position that I was never ever imagining to be able to enter.
Obviously, most people have more problems to solve on their flexibility ladder that will take more time, but it shows how essential the correct technique can be. I encourage you to try it. Try a side split just by opening your legs. Now try by tilting the hip forwards and sitting back a little. Show off your twerking. As you can imagine, almost every flexibility skill has at least one of these technique changes. For example, for bridge, the cueing is about lifting up and then arching over. Front splits will have more long-term gains by keeping the hips square and so forth. I can go on and on. The point is, whatever you choose to stretch, make sure you learn and apply the right technique. Doing these small changes will pay off in big ways. Sometimes it's the only way. Let's combine this together with an example. Dennis is a professional acrobat wanting to push his skills to the next level. We know that the side split is a skill that transfers to acrobatic performance, but right now he's tight. We need to improve his splits. First, we need to sharpen the axe with an assessment so we can find the bottom of his flexibility ladder. 3 tests we can do for this is first, the tailless pose or butterfly position. Tailless pose is an easy side split. It stretches the same muscles as a side split, but less of them. So if you can't tailless pose, it's going to make the side split much harder when your brain has to perceive more stretch and has to handle the increased demand. To do this, sit with your back against the wall. Bring your feet in close together and now pull your legs apart without your hands helping. Can you get your calves to touch down in a tailless pose? Dennis can't, so we now know we need to focus on isolating the shorter adductors and hip rotators through bent leg exercises. For the second test, let's look at the hip tilt with a pancake to see if he has the range to tilt the hip forwards enough to avoid that bone jam. Without this ability, the side split just is not going to happen for most people. Open your legs to your max width and now come in a little bit. Can you then get your head to touch down to the floor with a round back? Again, the answer is no here, so we now know we need to improve the hip tilt for side splits to work. Next, we can test the passive versus isometric versus active strength, like we did for Sondra and Sunniva earlier. We can then maximize the effectiveness of the training by having each exercise stack on top of the previous. So first is a bend knee exercise to open up the shorter adductors and hip rotators. This will help the pancake training we do next, which will also stretch these adductor muscles. The pancake training then increases the hip tilt needed for the side split technique. And next we can use these exercises that help us learn the correct technique for the side splits, but now have a greater ability to tilt our hip forwards because of the pancake training. Remember, getting this coordination right is make or break for the side splits, which will improve our ability to perform the final exercise with the right technique and get the best result. In summary, just 4 exercises with every single exercise targeting a specific issue on Dennis's flexibility ladder. Each exercise stacks up to make the next one better than if it was done on its own. Everything is targeting what he needs, everything is working together to maximize the result. This is why targeted stretching sessions based on flexibility skills beats full body routines. To visualize this, imagine a circle with each of the skills you want to improve. It's much quicker to bring up each skill one by one to complete the circle than gradually trying to expand everywhere together. Focused training, typically with 3 to 5 stretches working towards a specific skill, takes each session further than trying to improve everywhere at once, as each exercise helps to open up things for the next, even if the goal is to get flexible everywhere. Now, maybe you might be thinking, I can see how focusing my stretching towards one skill can help me progress faster, but won't I be losing my flexibility in other areas if I don't stretch anymore? If one skill is the fastest way to progress, how do I avoid losing flexibility in the areas I'm not stretching? That's a valid concern, but if it was true that you lose flexibility when you stop stretching, how is it possible that I can still drop into the side split despite not having done a proper side split training session in over 3 years? Here's how you can think about it. there are two different categories of adaptations that can make you more flexible. The first one is changes in your brain and nervous system. When you fold forwards to touch your toes, a signal is sent along your spinal cord to your brain. Once that signal reaches its maximum, your maximum tolerable perception of stretch, you cannot go any further. Stretching can improve your stretch tolerance at what's known as the supraspinal CNS level, which is a fancy name for your brain. And number two is changes in your body. Training can change your body, including tendon stiffness, alongside the length of your muscles, known as sarcomerogenesis. This has been shown in humans and is where your body adds sarcomeres, the building blocks of your muscle, in series at the end of the muscle fiber. Both the changes in your brain and body can help you become more flexible, but the brain adaptations are the most powerful because the brain adaptations stay long term. The problem with the changes in your body, like sarcomerogenesis, is after about 6 weeks of not using it, these adaptations will reverse and go away. And most programs don't optimize for the lasting brain changes. Even worse is how most people's stretching is essentially just warming up. This improves the viscoelastic nature of your muscles and tendons, which gives you a temporary increase in flexibility. It's like pouring honey. When it's warmer, it stretches out and pours more easily. However, this only lasts a few hours and leaves you back pretty much exactly where you were once everything cools down again, leaving people stuck in a cycle. They spend hours stretching, but it never quite makes the lasting improvements. In order to make the adaptations you want to your brain's perception of stretch, you need to train so that your brain is not limited by fatigue or tiredness signals from training. Fatigue from other sports and strength training can send afferent signals, which are signals sent from your body to your brain, which limits your brain's ability to tolerate a high stretch signal, as the fatigue takes up room in your available perception of stretch, which means your brain can't adapt as much to help you become more flexible. Balancing your training schedule and using proper rest periods becomes essential if you want to make flexibility gains that last, lasting even after you stop stretching for years. This is one of the reasons why my students can access their flexibility cold without warming up, even after they stopped flexibility training. By creating more permanent changes to your flexibility, it also allows you to focus on 1 or 2 skills at a time without losing much progress elsewhere. Furthermore, the skills overlap. For example, touching your toes transfers to the front leg of a front split, whilst the back leg transfers to a bridge. So by focusing the training on 1 or 2 skills, you can indirectly maintain and can even improve the others too. But do so in a way that you get that 1 + 1 = 3 stacking benefit to really push the skill you're working on further. Having to dedicate time to stretching should not be something you have to do forever. You need to go through a season of focusing on transforming your mobility, work to get it to the level you need, then it's surprisingly easy to maintain when done right. That's why in our community we like to say, stretch right, stretch once. Myself and many of the athletes I work with no longer need to stretch anymore. We have the range we need, and we now use the remaining time to maximize our other sports and practices. Focusing on skills instead of full body routines is how I unlocked all of my flexibility skills. It's how Liv unlocked her flexibility skills, and it's how Manu did the same. This was mostly done training 1 to 2 times per week. Focus on a skill and improve it to the level you need. Most people try to do too much. It's better to make progress where you need it now, because you can always add more later, than try to be overly ambitious and just end up quitting. Which brings us to stage 3. When and how often should we train our flexibility? And how do we optimize it for the adaptations in the brain that give us that longer lasting flexibility? To do this, we need to understand what happens inside our muscles when we train. In sport and strength training, we contract our muscles in order to move, be strong, and be powerful. The muscle is made up of lots of sarcomeres, which are the building blocks that make up our muscle and allow us to contract. In order to make this contraction happen, the brain sends a signal that comes all the way down and causes the release of calcium ions into the sarcomere. These calcium ions bind and cause actin and myosin to work together to shorten the sarcomere. And together the sarcomeres shorten all the muscle. In strength training, we release lots of these calcium ions. Now, the body doesn't want these calcium ions to accumulate inside, and so it's constantly trying to pump them out. But in strength training, they accumulate. And this accumulation of calcium ions activates something known as a calpain. A calpain is a protein-eating enzyme. Since our muscles are mostly made of proteins, these cause muscle fiber damage and other things like excitation, contraction, coupling failure. Anyway, this damage then causes inflammation. That inflammation enters the bloodstream, is then detected by your body and sends signals to your brain that you are fatigued. This is one of the ways your brain knows it's fatigued. What most people don't know is that flexibility training causes a similar thing, but through a slightly different mechanism. You see, in flexibility training, our sarcomeres all stretch, and that causes stretch-mediated calcium ion channels to open up, where the calcium ions can pass through and enter into the sarcomere. This causes an accumulation of the calcium ions inside. An accumulation activates the calpains. The calpains causes muscle fiber damage. That causes inflammation. It enters the bloodstream and is detected by the brain. Flexibility and strength training cause similar fatigue. Now, the reason it starts might be different, but the end result is the same. This is one of the reasons why flexibility, sport, and strength training should all be considered when scheduling the training. And I'm going to show you the 3 main ways of doing it. But first, notice that this cause of brain fatigue happens hours after the training. You know how if you do heavy leg strength training, 1 or 2 days later you can barely sit on the toilet? It's not the whole reason, but you could think of it how each of these steps is delayed. There's a delay for the calcium ions to accumulate. It takes time for the calpains to be activated. It takes time for them to cause the damage. Then there's a delay for the inflammation to happen, enter the bloodstream and be detected by the brain. This cause of brain fatigue happens hours after the training. It also takes hours or days for your body to repair itself and remove this fatigue. It's for this reason that the number 1 optimal time for mobility and flexibility training is 2 or more days after the sport or strength training that could affect it. Since this is not always realistic, especially with more demanding training schedules, the next best is actually to train on the same day as the sport or strength training. You do the sport or strength in the morning and then flexibility in the evening. This works because that brain fatigue has not fully hit the brain yet, so you can still improve and make the brain changes. The most common mistake is when people stretch the day after strength training, or worse, think they should add it on an off day as active recovery. It's not recovery. I'd argue that flexibility and strength are actually more similar than different, and in some cases, even the same thing. And if you can't train 2 times a day, then the third best option, which is still a very good option, is to do your mobility training after your sport or strength training. You just have to reduce the volume of each by a little bit when doing them together. Now you can see how we just need 3 to 5 exercises done 1 to 2 times per week for 1 or 2 skills at a time in order to transform your flexibility. It's time to start putting this into action. To see how this method is applied, just click the link in the description to start watching it, so you get flexible once and keep it forever. The blueprint summarized is this: set the goal by focusing on 1 or 2 flexibility skills that will help you move and perform better. Assess to find the problem at the bottom of your flexibility ladder and which exercises to use to fix it. Stretch stack the exercises to make them multiply together and perform each session 1 to 2 times per week, and organize them in your training in a way that optimizes for the adaptations that stay long term. And you might have noticed, there's 1 box left. The final step is to put it together and make it happen. We develop our flexibility to become free, move better, feel better, and use it in whatever sport or practices we want. The best part, when flexibility is built properly, it's surprisingly easy to keep it. This results in a unique freedom that comes from building a flexible, strong, and capable body, where you enjoy your flexibility. Here's your blueprint. Now it's time to go and apply it. If you want us to help implement it for you, click the link in the description and we'll walk you through the next steps. Anyway, keep up the good work and let's get to training.